So Eric, welcome to India, if I'm allowed to welcome you to India.
Well, thank you. Of course you are.
Thank you for having me. Yeah.
And by the way, thank you for coming all the way, to do this. And I want to thank everybody here for participating in the Big Tent. We've done a couple of these around the world. I think they work pretty well, and I was particularly impressed by the quality of the speakers, both the government speakers as well as the NGOs, the activists, and the technical people we've been able to attract so far. So thank you all for participating in this. Alan, go ahead.
I've been reading your book. Eric's written a book. It's not coming out till later in April. But it's about the things we're talking about today, and it's about the first billion, the next 5 billion, and India is, in a sense, a microcosm of what you're writing about. So we've been talking a lot today about the people who are digitally connected, but there's going to be a mass of people who are yet to come. What's this going to mean for India?
The rough numbers are there are roughly 600 million mobile phone users in India, plus or minus. There's about 130 million internet users and only about 20 million broadband users. So by any definition, India is under-penetrated. And in our book, which I wrote with Jared Cohen, who's here in the audience, we talk a lot about the importance of the next 5 billion. There's on the order of 2 billion people on the internet today. And many of those 5 billion will be coming from India. So imagine a situation 5 to 10 years from now when there's another billion people on the internet. Will they be significantly different than the first 100 million Indians? Surely there will be many more languages represented. It won't be so English focused. And in order to achieve that, we need a series of changes both in a regulatory structure, but most importantly, a build-out of the infrastructure of India and a lowering of the cost of devices. I think the sum of all of that, this place is going to be rocking.
We heard the Minister Sibal, this morning talking about the regulatory regime and saying the net must govern itself. But we've also heard anxieties in the room today about the degree to which that is true. There are various bits of legislation, including Section 66 and the Intermediary Liability Act, which cause you problems or could cause you problems. So what's your thought about what the Indian government in particular should be doing?
As the internet has sort of emerged in many of these different countries, there's quite a few countries that have essentially no laws that pertain to the internet at all. And those internets tend to be sort of free and open with almost anything goes. There are other governments that try very dramatically to censor or control the internet, China being the most egregious example. India is a country with a very, very strong commitment to free speech and public discussion, which is admirable. It's a strong and vibrant democracy with a strong legal system. There are some clarifications, in our view, needed to some of the aspects of the law, Rule 66, intermediate liability. And the reason is that you want entrepreneurs to be willing to take risks, and if they take a risk, you don't want them to be going to jail unless they're really evil. So, for example, when content is put up that's offensive, it's important that there be a proper amount of time to discover it's offensive and take it off. Not everyone who's going to join the internet in the next 500 million Indians is going to be a perfect citizen. There will be people who will actually make lies, they will be dramatic, they will promote things, they will do things which are inappropriate that are covered by your laws. It's important that the intermediaries, the telcos, the ISPs, companies like Google, all the new startups, have an ability to take that information down.
India's going to be different from other countries because it's going to leapfrog, especially straight to mobile. What are the implications of that direct transition to mobile?
There's no huge debate in the industry about the right path. So let me tell you the simple formula. Take fiber optic cables and run them everywhere in the ground that you possibly can imagine. Every road, every ditch, every piece of land, bury a fiber optic cable. Those fiber optic cables with optical amplifiers will last 20, 30, 40 years, and they will scale to infinite bandwidth. Each fiber optic cable can carry all the bandwidth that's available in the air around us today, and even more so with various other techniques involving wavelengths. So the fact of the matter is that fiber solves almost every connectivity problem, and you don't have enough of it. Once you have the fiber to the cities and the towns, the two choices people do nowadays is they have so-called 3G, 4G, more 4G now than 3G, which is a cellular technology which allows you to move around, and then something called Wi-Fi, which is a stationary technology, which is the thing that you would find, for example, in a hotel. In America, the percentage of wireless bandwidth is more Wi-Fi, believe it or not, than it is 3G, 4G. People don't know that. So both are important. But with this, whether you're stationary or whether you're moving, you're going to have really good bandwidth. The issues here have to do with the fact that the telecommunications industry is undercapitalized, has a lot of debt, is trying hard to build this, and they need help to do that. It's also important to make the transition to 4G because it's spectrally more efficient, and you can get a lot more bandwidth down it. The internet here feels like America around 1994. Right? It feels like you have tremendous upside in the kind of bandwidth you'll be able to use.
Moving on to the internet generally, you're, I suppose, on the utopian side of the argument, you're optimistic. In the past, you've been optimistic about the potential of the internet, and I'm just struck by the balance in the book between a feeling that interconnectivity is the key to everything, can solve everything from social justice and poverty and education. So it is almost the key thing in life. Is that overstated?
Well, I've been accused of being the chief propagandist
Yeah.
of Google in this regard, but I actually believe this. So let me give you some examples of problems that we have here in India that can be solved. You have an education problem. Schools don't have enough textbooks, standards are not strong enough, education can always be improved through mobile devices, which is how most people will consume the internet. And you ask, how is the mobile internet different? Not very much, except it's mobile apps as opposed to desktop apps. But for a person who's had nothing, a mobile app is phenomenal. And eventually the mobile apps will be more powerful because they're more personal. So it can solve your education problem, and wherever you are in language, culture, understanding, it can get you to be the best that you can be. That's a great strength of the internet. Highly individual learning. All of this happening now and happening very quickly over the next 5 years. Medicine. Again, in the rural areas here, a lot of lack of information about medicine, generally poor medical care. People have real medical problems. They'll find it out on the internet for many, many reasons. Think about banking. There's a large underbanked or underserved banking population here in India. Through a very clever system that my friend Nandan is building involving an Indian UID, it'll be possible for people to have both a unique name and then tie that into essentially e-commerce banking systems. There are many, many startups that are now building these e-commerce banking systems to move money around. And because of the scale, even though these are small amounts of money, these should be highly profitable businesses for these entrepreneurs. These are examples of this. Let's think about corruption. Corruption is also a problem in India and in many other countries. Because everything is registered on the internet, it's much more easy to investigate such crimes, document them, and bring the perpetrators to justice. So the level of sort of accuracy and precision that you get by the explosion in terms of education, medicine, health, and so forth and so on is phenomenal. There are also negatives. So, for example, the loss of privacy, which is a very real concern and something that we talk about in our book, and the possible misuse of this information by governments. Certainly has happened in the United States, may or may not have happened in Europe. It could certainly happen here as well.
So just talk about that dark side, because having met you before, interviewed you before, read about you and what you've been saying, there seems to be a more dystopian tone in this book, that you're more anxious about what's going to happen in a way that perhaps I haven't seen from you in the past.
Well, as I've explored it, I'm concerned that we need to fight for our privacy or we'll lose it. And the reason this is a concern of mine is that it's natural for these tools and technologies to aggregate information about citizens. We visited I'll give you an easier example, we visited in Mexico. And Mexico, they've set up a system to monitor the activities of their citizen and of the police. And it includes the development of a full dossier on every citizen that they encounter, what is their name, where are they, who are their relatives, and so forth and so on. Now, I don't know about Mexico whether they have sufficient legal protections that a future government might misuse that. Today they're building it because of this horrific corruption problem that they have because of the drug trade. It's very, very real, the drug killings and so forth. I'm not criticizing them for the need of their problem, but it's being done without the necessary, in my view, citizens' protections. I don't know enough about Indian law with respect to civil liberties, but I think it's very important that as this technology becomes pervasive in Indian society, the Indian laws and so forth respect the right of privacy, the right of misuse, the right of surveillance and so forth, especially from governments.
So some people would say it's a bit rich coming from you to be talking about loss of privacy because Google is the biggest invader of privacy there is on the planet.
Well,
some people would say that.
Again, I've heard that, and my response is that the Internet is doing that, and I would also offer
You are the Internet, aren't you?
Well, unfortunately, I wish we were, but Google is not the Internet. Google is an example of an innovative company on top of the Internet. But if Google didn't exist, these problems would all be exactly the same. And the fact of the matter is that there's no delete button on the Internet. And so falsehoods last longer. Typical example, I'll give you another example. In societies that I'm familiar with, if you're a juvenile and you commit some terrible crime, that kind of thing, in many, many cases, those records can be expunged. If you manage to get it to be 18, the judge says, hey, you were just a kid, that was terrible, and we won't publish that information, it's forgotten, you don't need to reveal it. How is that possible in an always-on Internet, where the mistakes that you make when you're 15, and 15-year-olds in every country make mistakes, how is it possible to get those deleted? And they're probably not going to get deleted. I'll give you another example from your own industry. I try to avoid off-the-record interviews. So let's imagine that instead of being me, I was a person who was giving you important information about something very, very sensitive. And if it were revealed that I was leaking that to you, I would lose my job, or my family would be killed, or I'd be exiled. And this does occur. I was just in North Korea, for heaven's sakes. You take notes as a journalist, and you write the notes down. Where do those notes go? You don't have to answer that for The Guardian. But how would you feel if the Chinese had just hacked into the New York Times and had gone through all of the internal servers of the New York Times? How would you feel if you were a Chinese dissident? You'd be worried if you had indeed done that. So these are some of the problems that happen when everyone's connected.
And your book has a helpful chapter for journalists on how to negotiate these security problems.
But my point here is that this is going to happen because the value of the Internet is so profoundly positive. But we've got to recognize some of the issues and get ahead of it by conversation.
What about anonymity? Because again, there's some people that detect in your remarks a sense that you're now on the side of people who want an end to anonymity.
Oh, I'm certainly not. Google will always allow for anonymous search. If you choose, this is very important to hear this, if you choose to be logged in and let us record more information about you, we can provide better service for you. But you don't have to. And anonymity is very important, especially for people who have reasons to believe that the state or others are going to hurt them. So the Internet in general has been pretty good about allowing for anonymity. So for example, the development of public key crypto systems, PGP and the others, really do allow an anonymous communication. And I'll give you an example. If you're in most citizens don't understand the importance of anonymity, so they do whatever the default is. But machine intelligence can find groups of people who are choosing to be anonymous as long as they're rare. So you want to be very careful to have enough people that are being anonymous that you cannot be singled out by virtue of your being anonymous. This is roughly analogous to the VPN argument in China. Virtual private networks are how you avoid their censors. The machine intelligence in the Chinese communist system can find those connections and pinpoint you through that. So you have to have enough people doing it that you cannot be so isolated. So these are kind of the subtleties of this new world, and people are figuring this out.
Give me a couple of minutes on the future of search. So you've got this staggering statistic in your book about how every 2 days now more information is added to our some knowledge digitally than existed from the beginning of time to 2003.
It's important to say the word information does not necessarily say valuable information.
No. Well, but that's
because the vast majority of that is Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube.
That's my point. So, in a sense, is there anybody in the room that doesn't feel overwhelmed by the amount of information that exists? No. No, there's not a single person that doesn't feel.
But the great thing about that's a search problem, and that's what we do is we do search.
But what are the limitations? I mean, we're getting to the end of the limitation. What comes after search? Because search is increasingly looking like a rather crude tool.
I agree with that, but I think the important thing to say, the good news about your question is it sets up a good business for Google for a few years more, because ranking is how you deal with an excess of information. It looks like the rate of innovation in terms of creation of information is accelerating. Humans have a lot to say, and trust me, when the next 500 million Indians come online, they're going to have a lot to say to you all, right? Because they haven't been able to talk to you before, and they have opinions, and you may or may not like them, but they're going to be heard, just as you were heard over the last 5 or 10 years. I think this is a wonderful, wonderful thing. But every one of them creates a search problem and an indexing problem and so forth. So our indices are now massive. Our algorithms are incredibly sophisticated to do the ranking. But ultimately, we have to make a choice of who's first, who's second, who's third, using the best information we can. And again, the more information you choose to give us, the better our ranking can be, although you can choose to give us none, and we'll do the best we can. In the longer term, you want to think about computers much more as sort of your assistant on a day-to-day life. So if we go back to the phone, what happens over the next 5 or 10 years to the phones, especially in developed countries which have the bandwidth, is they become much more of your personal memory. So here I am in India. What I'd like my phone to say is, Eric, you've been to this hotel before. Yes, you met with these people before, but you forgot them. This is the correct way to address this person, to sort of serve as my digital aid and assistant. Computers are very good at infinite memory problems and needle in a haystack problems. They're very bad in the area of judgment, sort of human thinking, right? Although we're trying to get better on that. And so it's probably the case that most of our use of these things will be as assistants that are situational. Google has a product called Google Now at the moment that tries to intuit, again, if you give it permission and so forth, to make suggestions. Like it thinks you're going from your home to your office. It tells you how long it thinks it's going to take you, trying to be helpful, and you can turn it off if you don't like it. So you'll see more and more of that. Think of that as search without actually typing the search in. And again, those algorithms will get better and better.
When can I get Google Now on my iPhone?
On your iPhone?
Yeah.
You'll need to discuss that with Apple. Apple has a policy of approving or disapproving apps that are submitted into its store, and some of the apps we make they approve, and some of them they don't. They recently did approve Google Maps, thank goodness. And without being too obnoxious, you have excellent vendors of Android choices for you in London from many different suppliers.
Free adverts. So Apple got a problem with Google Now?
That was an ambiguous statement.
That was a question.
Does Apple have a problem with Google or Google Now?
Google Now, capital letter.
Let me not talk about the specifics. I don't think they're particularly worried about Google Now.
Tell me about Germany and France. So they're slightly different. You've just paid the French government an enormous sum of money because they disagreed with some of the things you're doing around search and the impact on traditional media. And the Germans are even more irritated with you, and they're really going for it. What's the difference between Germany and France?
Well, I think the question of the difference between Germany and France has been discussed for hundreds of years. Let's just say there are differences.
It never ends well.
That's right.
It never
Especially
ends well.
not for British or Americans. But the French have a particular industrial model, which is a partnership model. We've been engaged in lengthy conversations through the President's office with the chief publishers. They have a problem where the digital transition is not happening fast enough from a revenue perspective, something you understand very well in Britain as well. And so what we agreed after a lot of give and take with the President was to create a digital transition fund of 50 or 60 million euros, I believe, over a 5-year period, And that money will be run by a board, of which Google is one of, I think, 9 members, correct me if I'm wrong. And those members will then choose the technologies and new ways of monetizing digital content for France. I think this is an excellent outcome.
That sounds great. Can we have one too?
I'm sure we can talk about it.
Is that a yes? You can just say yes.
That's right. The reason I like this model is I don't like the idea of randomly writing checks to publishers in the old model, and I think it's a very good idea for Google to assist in the transformation of their business model from old to new. So it's a very good positioning. The Germans, we had a different situation. The Germans invented a new concept, which they called ancillary copyright, which can be roughly understood as if there is a link to my content, you owe me money. This construct, which makes perfect sense to their lawyers, breaks some of the core ways in which the internet works, and so we fought very hard over this. And through a series of complicated negotiations, a law was passed in the lower house approximately 3 weeks ago, which establishes this principle, but gives an opt-out for small number of words and links, which is what we do. So we think that's an okay outcome. It's sort of a step in the wrong direction because it doesn't really address the business model question, which we would argue is best addressed through new forms of advertising, new forms of subscription, because frankly your users are moving online, and they're moving online because they're moving to tablets and they're moving to mobile phones, tablets and mobile phones from Google's partners, Apple and others.
When we were talking just now, you told me you love Google Reader.
Oh yes, I do love Google Reader.
But you've killed it.
Well, we had priorities, and there are plenty.
Each man kills the thing he loves.
I know. Well, all I can tell you is that RSS readers they're very good choices and alternatives to Google Readers, and we needed those people to work on other much more integrated products. But it's with a heavy heart I answer that question, but that's the truth. So I will have to choose, on the deadline of the day, I will then fix and choose to another one of Google Readers.
So it's just a question of priorities.
Yeah, it's always about priorities.
When you go to the Google More page,
yeah,
there used to be lots of stuff there. I mean, it used to be 2 or 3 pages of really interesting, innovative stuff, and now it's quite a short list. Mm-hmm. Now, is that because you've run out of new ideas, or is it that you've decided to consolidate?
The thinking that Larry and Sergey and I and the product area structure that was created when Larry replaced me, obviously with my full support, is that we needed to take our scarce resources and make these systems global platforms. Under my leadership, we had much more of a try here, try there, which worked really well. But the thinking, which we all agreed to, was it was time to stop throwing things over the fence and seeing what happened, but have much, much more sophisticated understanding of the global impact of our problems and products, the scale and so forth. And that's led to the tremendous success that you see now with YouTube, Gmail, Chrome, Android. I mean, the list of it, and I haven't even mentioned search and ads. Maps, look at what we've done there. So the focusing had the cost of making the More page shorter, but it had the benefit of taking the scarce resource, which is ultimately the thinking of the company, and you produce these products which they literally have no peer. They're that good, and I say that as a booster.
So you're not. It's not a question of consolidation.
No. The term that we use internally is spring cleaning, and Google Reader is an example of spring cleaning.
Okay. You're very reliant on advertising.
Yes, we love advertising.
98%, is that right?
98 or 98.5.
Yeah, so that's quite reliant. Lots of people are worried about how advertising is going to work on mobile, or whether advertising does work on mobile, or whether we're moving into a sort of post-advertising age anyway.
Well, first place, do you really think advertising is going to go away, guys? Look at the development. Drive on the highways here. Look at the number of ads. Advertising is not going to go away. It changes. And part of Google's success is because we showed that advertising can be a science as well as an art. It needs to be both, because you can actually measure advertising efficiency. So the issue in the industry, of which Google is simply an example of this problem, is that mobile advertising is different in a number of ways. It's much more personal and therefore should be worth more. But in our case, there's less inventory, the targeting is different, and the form factor, the physical size of the ad is smaller, which actually does affect capture rates and so forth. So we are in the process of changing and adapting our mobile ads products to address all of this, I think quite successfully. But it's a transition that the whole industry will go through. But no one should be confused as to the future. The future is mobile, right? We're in a transition. It's multi-years, maybe it's a decade, but it's a mobile future. It's tablets and mobile devices of one kind or another. Maybe even Google Glasses, maybe the rumored Apple Watch. You never know, but it's mobile devices.
Yeah, so I can't work out if you've answered the question or not. I mean, because the kind of advertising that's, I mean, on these tiny screens, all the forms of advertising that we've been used to in digitally so far, and some people think those don't work very well either, but the new formats haven't yet really arrived.
Well, our formats work better than any other advertising that you can do, including television and radio, and we know this mathematically, so we're doing just fine.
Yeah.
So don't be too worried about us.
I stay awake at night worrying about it. But
so we're very, very proud of our we can prove that our ads are more effective. That's why people come to us, and they come to us in recessions as well as growth periods and so forth. They know it works. So the conversion ratios and so forth and so on, which we understand very well, are also going to be very good on mobile. The reason to believe, and again, we're in a transition now, the reason to believe that mobile ads should ultimately be more valuable is because we have more information about the consumer, because we're connected to them. We know roughly their location. If they choose to, they can share their history with us. They can also target the areas in which they want advertising. So for all of those reasons, I've always believed that mobile ad revenue on a per ad basis should be higher, and the industry is working to get it to be even. And the other thing to know is that while it's true in aggregate, for example, that PC growth rates are slowing, which has been widely reported, mobile growth rate is through the roof. And so it's a blend of the two, which has helped Google's financial performance, which is well documented.
Tell me about, because there are a lot of journalists in the room, and there are the indications that Twitter is interested now in becoming a news organization. Is that a good idea? Is that an interesting idea? Is that going to work?
I don't know Twitter's plans. A whole bunch of them are friends, and a number of them we sent over to help run them and things like that. But so I don't know how they're going to go. What is impressive to me is the scale of reach of Twitter, and how effectively a 140-character limit has been used for people who care about publicity, who care about getting messages around. One model for journalism in the long run is that journalism will have more celebrity in it as opposed to less. That trust in average society, the average person is sort of obsessed with celebrity for whatever reasons. And it's probable that celebrities will play an even greater role in what you think of as legitimate news coverage, because people trust the celebrity for reasons, again, we're never quite sure.
Let's talk about you.
Sure.
You've announced that you're going to be selling off 40% of your stock, and some people see that as a signal that your time in Google will be coming to a natural end.
Completely false.
You can see why they think that.
No, they're just wrong.
They're wrong. Okay.
Yeah. No, Google is my home, and this is a normal. I've been doing a series of diversification sales over the years, and this is just another one. We told the press this, but they didn't believe us, and yet they didn't bother to check that it was just an extension of the previous year's selling period.
Right. You don't want a job in government?
No, never.
Never?
Have you spent any time in government?
Not personally, no.
Try it.
Right. So that's never, ever, ever. Right.
The government people have a very, very hard job. I much prefer this job. It's much easier.
I have some questions crowdsourced from Twitter. Frankie Panky.
Would that be a real name?
That's my anonymous. I'm anonymous, yeah. What exactly were you trying to achieve in North Korea?
Free food, hang out with the basketball players, that kind of thing. Sorry, wrong guy. The North Korea is the last place of sort of no internet connectivity. They have a 1 million or so network of cell phones run by an Egyptian conglomerate. There's essentially no connectivity out of the country. It's the last really closed country in the world, which is sort of bizarre in and of itself. My goal was to try to convince them to take the infrastructure that they have and simply turn on the data services. It's a relatively simple political decision to turn on. They have the internet in their universities and schools, but it's censored. They have their Korean intranet. And so this is a society which has suffered as a result of lack of information. There's been no growth, of course, a horrific famine, and the paranoia that comes from being so isolated and their rather bizarre behavior, which does not serve them well. I did my very best to tell them this, and I said it very clearly. They, in their own way, repeated all of their anti-American propaganda, which I have since understood is their standard line.
And I'm just interested why you care enough about North Korea to want to...
The internet was built for everyone, including North Koreans. Right? The internet, when the people who founded it, they didn't say internet, good for everyone except the people being led by the dear leader. Right? There's no carve-out for North Koreans. And if there's anybody who needs the internet, it's people who are in such a situation who don't have the ability to develop critical thinking skills. They don't have an ability to sort of understand the choices that they as citizens face, and it hurts their growth of their economy. And what's interesting is if you listen to the rhetoric for a while, the government claims to be interested in economic growth. Quickest way to get economic growth in North Korea is to open up the internet, to get its people educated. They have all the same issues of medicine and healthcare and so forth, and they're not growing. And their neighbors to the south are growing at this horrendously exciting pace. The North Koreans, the South Koreans, just like the Indians, are all depressed because your growth rate is 5% per year. Can you imagine if Europe or the U.S. were growing at 5% per year? Come on, guys, right? So here you have the sort of the tale of two Koreas. And it's not a good situation to have the two growing at such a differential rate, and it's not a good idea to slow down South Korea. So let's find a way to get the prosperity of North Korea. It will help the governance, it'll make it safer, it'll help the people.
But this is not the behavior of a conventional corporation to be worrying about the governance problems of North Korea. So this is almost CSR, is it?
Google is... my personal answer is that I get to spend 20% of my time on whatever I wanted, so I wanted to spend my time on North Korea. So far, they let me in once.
Okay.
I don't know if they're going to let me in again.
Next Twitter question from someone called Stephen Webb. That sounds like a real name. How can Google help the National Health Service share more performance data and give patients easier access to notes? So that's really a question. Some people think Google's going to get into the healthcare business.
Is that a National Health Service referring to the British National Health Service?
I think it's about the National Health Service in Britain, but it's, I suppose, if I can broaden it and say, what would you have ambitions in terms of?
I have a view of these large public institutions that they're too big to be run secretly. That there are too many choices that they make internally. They have too much of a public good. It'd be better off if they were more transparent. I believe that this is true of governments. I also believe it's true of health services and so forth. In medicine in particular, medicine has historically been seen as a sort of an intuition-based approach. This is how I feel or what. But there's a lot of evidence that medicine can largely be systematized and treated as an engineering problem. We know that people who go through the same doctors who do the same procedures every hour have higher quality outcomes than ones that do it sporadically and so forth. So a little bit of systems engineering, a little bit of measurement helps a lot. So that combined with the revolution that's going to occur with mobile phones, where people are going to take their own healthcare into their own hands, or literally into their own phones, is going to change everything. There are now startups that are doing electrocardiograms that literally run on your phone. There are patches that transdermally measure everything going on in your body. In our book, we mention believe it or not, an FDA-approved pill which you take, which Wi-Fi's out the situation going on inside your stomach for the period of time, but it's in your stomach, and then you can discuss what happens after that. So the fact of the matter is this sort of digital transformation of medicine produces all of these analytics, and yet the medical profession is not organized around taking advantage of the data modeling and the data mining that computer scientists would do. That will produce huge gains in healthcare and also significant improvements in cost.
Let's have some questions. There's one there. Very quick on the draw. Have we got microphones? Is there somebody over there? Where are the microphones? Okay, there's one there. And then if there's another there's a hand at the front here if there's another microphone, but let's have your question meanwhile. Can't hear you. Let's see if this microphone works while we're waiting. Sir at the front.
Yes, go ahead.
We can't hear you.
Okay, we'll work on mics.
Try your microphone now.
Let's try the first guy.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Great. My name is Sachin Tapadia, and I'm a founder of a recently launched company called Local Circles. The idea is to build a local social network to improve daily life and make credible information easily available. Things like how do you find a good pediatrician in central Delhi, or how do you get your child admitted into a particular school.
Sure.
Things not available through regular search. I'm not marketing here. The platform has been built globally, but the first market is Indian, and our investors are Indian. Here is the challenge that we face, and I hope to hear from you on this. So India has very limited
question because we want to get lots of questions.
India has very limited expertise in terms of social media investments because we haven't built platforms like Facebook and LinkedIn. So the expertise lies in America, and the investors lie in America, while the market is Indian. How can companies like Google, who are global, play a role in assisting companies like these and helping them move forward?
Well, the Google answer would largely be to try to use as many of our platform products as possible. So try to use Google+, our APIs, all of that as you can in your architecture.
40% of our company runs on Google, the remaining 40 runs on Amazon.
Good. So hopefully we'll improve our percentage. So in general, you're well served by using, and Amazon, by the way, does a fine product as well, using these modern cloud-based services. I disagree with you that you're hampered by the lack of social knowledge. You have everything you need. You have incredibly smart people who have local knowledge of how the city works. What do people really care about? And all of these social apps that you're describing have the property they're about solving a problem I have. So if I were running a startup like yours, I would sit down and I would walk around, I would spend a whole day with my team, wandering around and asking questions. What problem can I solve right now? Where's my doctor? Where's my store? How do I get the drugs delivered? How do I get some money to pay for it? And I'd solve all of those in a very simple UI. You're going to do great.
Yeah. I want the person whose microphone didn't
Yes,
work,
sir.
and then let's have a question from over there. And we've had two men, so if we can have a woman, please. Yes.
You have two mobile operating systems, but now that Chrome, Android, and apps are all being headed by the same person, should we expect one of them to go the Google Redo?
No, is the answer. We don't make decisions, some companies do this, but we don't make decisions based on who the leader is. We make the decisions at Google based on where the technology takes us. Chrome and Chromium are the world's best HTML5 authoring and development systems. If you're not using Chrome as an advertisement, for example, right now, you should be using Chrome. It's faster, it's safer, it's more secure than any of your other browser choices. In Android, which is primarily a Java-like development environment, it solves a different problem. There will be more commonality for sure, but they're certainly going to remain separate for a very, very long time because they solve different problems.
Right, have we found a woman over here? Is there a woman over there? There's a woman there in the middle. Can we get one microphone to the woman in the middle there?
I have
and
one.
Meanwhile, you've got a microphone.
Yes.
There's a woman with a microphone. Fantastic. Let's.
Hi.
Yes, ma'am.
Google came out very strongly in favor of net neutrality when the
Yes.
debate began in 2006, but after that it feels like there's been some doubt about the company's position. Could you talk a little bit about that, particularly with what happened in France recently?
I have not seen the text of the French law. Google's general position is that we're in favor of a particular kind of net neutrality. We don't want a content owner that also owns a network to unfairly prejudice or boost, if you will, their content compared to the other content, because we don't think that serves the end user very well. It's fine, for example, to have differential policies for differential kinds of traffic. And that's been our policy for a very long time. The best solution to network neutrality is huge competition. As long as there's lots of competitors, none of the players can get involved and do these sorts of things. So our real position is to have 3 or 4 mobile operators, 3 or 4 broadband operators, and more importantly, to have them have different and orthogonal technology strategies. So not everyone using exactly the same 3G distribution architectures or the same broadband architectures. So having a multi-layered approach of competition is the best defense on all of these issues in our view.
Right, is there somebody over there with a microphone? If there is, stand up. And man or woman, I don't mind over there.
I have a mic here. Can I go?
Yes?
Hello. Yeah. So I'm Shrey Malhotra and from Google Developer Group, New Delhi. So my question is, what we have seen as developers is the devices that land up in the US, basically the Nexus series and other devices by Google. These devices are usually low-cost devices and high-performance devices, but they never come to India and other countries in Asia. So any comments on that? Why do people like developers like us don't get those?
This is something that we're working on. Part of the problem is our products are more expensive than they should be here in India. Sometimes it's certification issues, but it's a known problem, and I do apologize. We are working on it. We want to fully serve this market.
We're probably due for a woman now, but I can see actually Mr. N. Ram is over there. If we can get a microphone to Ram, the former editor of The Hindu. And then I want a woman from over here because we're 5-1 at the moment.
How long do you think it'll take before general newspapers find some kind of sensible, stable business model to carry on? Because there have been many debates in mature media markets, especially in the US, on the future of journalism. Will there be a future for journalism? So what's your thinking on how long it'll take and whether it'll come from paywalls or ad-led or whatever? What's your thinking?
You know, this problem has been around for more than a decade, and newspapers, which are the heart of, I think, democracy, had sort of three sources of revenue. They had static ads, they had circulation, and they had classifieds. And they were also, so all of those declined in various reasons because of the internet and viewing patterns and so forth and so on, and demographic issues. At least in America. It's better in some other countries. It's doing particularly well here in India. I think it's also doing very well in Britain, so that's to your credit. The increase in cost of newsprint, cost of labor, expensive new printing plants, that sort of stuff has certainly made it more difficult. We have a couple of very, very good examples. In America, I can give you two. One is Politico, which emerged as a sort of online only with a newspaper attached, primarily ad-supported. Another one was the Huffington Post, which again has gotten a lot of readers. So a reasonable model is that new starts are probably going to be advertising supported because they'll go for the widest audience and they'll make small amounts of money in advertising. A reasonable prediction is that the incumbent businesses, which already have subscribers in the form of print subscribers, will transition them to online subscribers. So I think that's kind of a reasonable state for most countries. I want you to think about 5 years from now or 10 years from now. What will your average reader look like? That average reader will have an ultra-powerful tablet. They'll have a subscription on that tablet. The knowledge that's in that tablet about them and the things they care about will be incredibly much greater than the newspaper of today. And it'll be possible, reading a story, to go infinitely deep about the origins, the history, the positioning, the debate. And so the evidence is that newspapers will thrive, but they'll thrive in this new model. And they'll have subscriptions, sponsorships, and in some cases free model. And I think that's a very predictable thing. The newspapers that have been most affected are the ones in the middle. They're not completely local, but they're not national, and they're not in a big city. There's always going to be a place for newspapers on people sitting in subways and in crowded buses and so forth and so on, or the tablets. It's harder to argue for the overstressed suburban mom driving in the car with the 3 kids, screaming at her, who has a tough job anyway, and how much time she's going to be able to read the newspaper. And that's where I think the real issues have been.
That was such a good answer and such a hopeful answer that we're almost out of time. So I'm going to have to disappoint, especially as we teed up people to. We've just run out of time for questions. And we've got 17 seconds left, and I've got 5 questions left. So
okay, go ahead.
We'll just make this quick.
Ready to go quick answers.
And it's all about choices, the choices that you were made. Well, you said you had to make tough choices now. So I'm just going to ask you some quick choices.
Sure.
Kindle or BlackBerry?
I'm a BlackBerry user, because I like the keyboard, although BlackBerry is slowly in trouble.
Facebook or Twitter?
Twitter has a more distinct model because of the celebrity and publishing model. Facebook is in a transition, and I don't know enough about what they're transitioning to. I will tell you that if you have a billion users, you can make money.
Amazon or Apple?
Well, of course, I was on the board of Apple, so I have a soft spot for Apple. They're both going to do well. Apple will continue to be a tremendous technology innovator and build beautiful products, regardless of the market share of the products, and that's a great strength. They will continue to be that innovator. Amazon has well passed any expectations of its ability to change distribution and marketing. They're an important Google partner, and I think compete with us as well.
iPad mini or iPad?
iPad, I have both.
iPad. You don't like the little one?
It's too small.
That's the point of it.
Well, you should have told me that before
right,
I bought
okay.
it. But, frankly, if you take a look at the Samsung 10-inch tablet,
Yeah.
notice called the Nexus 10, I would have a chat look at that.
And final
More
question.
apps, more scalable, more secure. Sorry.
Final question, India or China?
In the short term, India gets all the attention. China gets all the attention. The math favors India.
Great.
And I'm a mathematician.
We'll finish there. Big hand, Eric.
Thank you. Thank you, guys. Thank you all. Thank you all for coming.